Hello and welcome to this edition of Back in History. In Back in History, we take you back in time to the events that took place in the historical past. We thought it wise to do a series on the names, faces, and profiles of the majors of the Nigerian army that took part in the planning and execution of the January 1966 military coup, which took place in Nigeria and which left in its trail a tale of assassinations that shook Nigeria to its marrow. We begin the series with the profile of Patrick Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu. His native name was Chukwuma, having been born to parents of Igbo origin. Upon the administration of the sacrament of baptism on him, he was given the name Patrick. Chukwuma was born in Kaduna, in the then northern region of Nigeria. He grew up in Kaduna and attended his primary and secondary education there. He spoke the Hausa language fluently. He was literally made in Kaduna. He loved Kaduna with passion. Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu was born on 26 February 1937. At the time of his birth, his parents were residents in Kaduna. His parents were from Anioma in present-day Delta State. When he came of age for enrollment in elementary school, his parents took him to St. John's Catholic Primary School, Kaduna, and upon completion of his primary education, he was enrolled at St. John's College, also in Kaduna. Kaduna as a city was a melting pot of cultures, with people from various parts of Nigeria and from outside Nigeria living therein and doing businesses there or doing one form of endeavor or the other. Chukwuma grew up in this environment and had the opportunity of interacting with people from cultures other than his own. He integrated easily and freely with them. He soon became fluent in the Hausa language and found it very easy to communicate with his classmates, friends, neighbors, and many others. Done with secondary education, the next thing in his agenda was to chart a career path for himself. This was where Chukwuma opted to make a career in the military. When the forms for enrollment in the military was out, he obtained one, supplied the needed information, submitted the form, and was invited for interview. He emerged successful and was enrolled for military training. That was in 1957. At that time, Nigeria was still under colonial rule under the British Empire, and Nigeria did not have its own army, an army that bore the name of the country. The military for Nigeria was known as the Nigeria Regiment of the Royal West African Frontier Force. Having emerged successful, Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, along with his mates, were sent for training in the Gold Coast in present-day Ghana. On completion of his training in Ghana, he was sent to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in the United Kingdom. He was here from October 1957 to 1959 when he was commissioned as infantry officer. He also attended other military courses in the United Kingdom. On his return to Nigeria, he was deployed to various military formations. He was first posted to Enugu, where he served in the Nigerian Regiment's 1st Battalion. He worked under a British military commander with a Nigerian, Major Agui Ironsi, as the second in command. His next posting was the 5th Battalion in Kaduna. His posting to Kaduna was like a homecoming for Chukwuma. From Kaduna, he was posted to Congo, which was a war-torn area at the time. He was later posted back to Nigeria and deployed to the Army Training Depot in Zaria. Zaria is in Kaduna State, and for Chukwuma, Zaria was home for him. He did his work with diligence as a training officer. He was a calm and collected fellow. He was easygoing and very mindful of his work. His superiors thus found him worthy in character for assignment to a most sensitive aspect of the army and national security. This is how he was posted out from Kaduna to Lagos, which was the capital of Nigeria at the time, where he was assigned to head the military intelligence unit at the army headquarters. Chukwuma did his work creditably here. He was in fact the first Nigerian to head the intelligence section of the Nigerian army. This is a very sensitive arm of any army, and only those that are trusted, those that are smart, focused, and intelligence are usually assigned to the intelligence unit. Chukwuma was in this unit from 1962 to 1964. At this time, Nigeria had gained independence and the name of the army was changed to the Nigerian Army. As head of intelligence, he had the dossier of who is who in the military and in the political arena in Nigeria. In the course of his work as head of intelligence, Nigerian Army, Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu clashed with the then Minister of State for the Army, Alhaji Ibrahim Tako, and the army hierarchy reacted to this and transferred him from the intelligence unit in Lagos back to Kaduna. He was assigned to the Nigerian Military Training College NMTC, Kaduna, as chief instructor. The NMTC was a training institute for those who aspired to become soldiers. It was Nigeria's domestic institution for military training. Cadets started here but were in the course of their training sent overseas to complete their training and get commissioned as soldiers. So the NMTC was a very significant institution for Nigeria. Chukwuma did his work here creditably and saw to the molding of young cadets for the army. The NMTC is the precursor of the Nigerian Defense Academy. While in the training college, Chukwuma became well known to the cadets, their parents, and to the top echelon of the military, and also known to the political class. He had students who admired him greatly as a well-trained and disciplined officer. It was while Chukwuma was here at the training college as an instructor that he conceived the plan to stage a coup and replace the first leaders of independent Nigeria. The planning of the coup began with the inner circle of university-educated young military officers. Like minds were recruited into the scheme. It took a number of months to plan the coup. At that time, there was no GSM communication in Nigeria. Chukwuma and others thus met at designated locations on specific dates. Whenever they met, their mission was to fine-tune the coup plot. The plot eventually took shape and roles were assigned. Chukwuma at this time was a major in the Nigerian army, and part of the plan was that the coup should be led by majors. 7 majors made up the plot. It took so much to convince some of them, but eventually they came fully into the coup plot. The 7 majors were Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, Major Emmanuel Ajuna, Major Christian Anuforo, Major Humphrey Chukwuka, Major Timothy Onwatuegu, Major Donatus Okafo, and Major Adewale Ademoyega. They were all assigned roles and a date was fixed for the execution of the coup. Chukwuma was a Kaduna boy, and for this reason and other reasons he was assigned to execute the coup in the northern region of the country. He was to invade the residence of the Premier of the North, Sir Ahmadu Bello, and capture him. It would be recalled that Chukwuma was the chief instructor of the Army Training College in Kaduna. As chief instructor, he had the power to carry on the training of cadets within the campus and outside the campus. Their training was intended to be largely practical, and as such, they could be taken to anywhere for the practical training. On this fateful day, Chukwuma took some cadets to the premises of the Premier on the pretext that they are there for practical training or reconnaissance. He gave the training a name, namely Operation Damisa. The military hierarchy had no indication of what Chukwuma's true intention was. It was simply a coded plot to remove the Premier of the northern region, dead or alive. The operation took place in the dark. The time was agreed by the coup plotters to be between 2 a.m. to 2:40 a.m. All participants were to strike at their target simultaneously. Chukwuma carried out his own task as was agreed. In the middle of the night, he struck at the Premier's lodge. The Premier was killed. One of his wife, Hafsatu, was also killed. His private secretary and personal driver were also killed. Chukwuma succeeded in his own portion of the assignment, but left in the trail a pool of blood flowing from one corner of the palace to the other. It was a horrible sight and a dark day for the Sardauna's family, northern Nigeria, and Nigeria at large. But there was no such successful execution in the other parts of the country. Some targets were not killed. Daybreak met the coup plotters unable to achieve their goals as was planned, and for this reason, loyal troops were raised to frustrate the coup. The plan to take over the entire country thus failed, and in reaction, Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu declared martial law in the northern region of Nigeria and took absolute charge of the region. He went on radio and made a broadcast announcing to the people of northern Nigeria that the entire region was now under his absolute control and that all orders for the day-to-day functioning of the North will henceforth be taken from him. All military formations were to take orders from him. It was a strange situation, but it was the reality of the moment. Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu held sway in the North for hours running into days. He granted press interviews to both local and foreign media journalists. In these interviews, he justified his action in the coup and also justified the killings that took place. Chukwuma was unapologetic despite the criticism that trailed his involvement in the coup and the coup generally. At this time, most of the coup planners and executors had been captured and sent to prison. The coup in the other regions of Nigeria had been fully frustrated by loyal troops, and the most senior military officer in Nigeria, General Lagoyi Ironsi, had taken over the leadership of the country at the then capital, Lagos, the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa having been killed in the coup by the Lagos group and Nigeria's First Republic having been violently truncated. Ironsi had taken charge of 3 out of the 4 regions that made up Nigeria at the time and even appointed military governors to the regions. He appointed Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu for the Eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi for the Western region, and Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo for the Midwestern region. He also appointed a governor for the Northern region in the person of Lieutenant Colonel Hassan Katsina. All the governors had assumed office except Hassan Katsina. Nzeogwu was still the man in charge of the Northern region. The soldiers on ground still took orders from him, and the situation was too volatile and too dangerous for Hassan Katsina to resume as governor of the North. As noted earlier, the Northern region had been taken captive by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu. But how Nzeogwu was going to hold on to this state of affairs when the North was not a country of its own, but still a region within Nigeria, was the question on the lips of many citizens of the country. As Nzeogwu was consolidating himself in power in the North, Ironsi was also scheming and strategizing on how to remove power from Nzeogwu's hand, and military action was not an option. Nzeogwu still had his boys on ground, and a military action would have resulted in countless casualties. Ironsi then opted to lure Nzeogwu into his net, but with the use of tact and diplomacy. He sent 2 persons to talk to Nzeogwu. These 2 persons were Nzeogwu's friends, persons whom Nzeogwu would not point any gun at them in any circumstance. These 2 persons were Alexander Madiegbo and Nwawu, both of whom were senior ranking officers. Nwawu was on course in the United Kingdom and was not available in Nigeria during the coup, but because of what Ironsi needed to achieve through him, Ironsi sent a special jet to airlift him from the United Kingdom to Kaduna, where he would meet with Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu and talk him into abandoning the revolution. These 2 persons went to work. They told Nzeogwu that the coup had failed in all other parts of the country and that the best Nzeogwu could ask for was a peaceful surrender to the new government of Ironsi. That he would not be able to sustain his hold on the North. That he should consider moving to Lagos to join Ironsi in the new government. That Ironsi was ready to work with him. Nzeogwu was initially reluctant, but he was made to speak with Ironsi on phone. Landlines were working optimally then. Ironsi assured him of his safety and told him that he will be absorbed into his government. Nzeogwu made his own request as his condition for surrendering to Ironsi, He requested that all his colleagues that had been arrested should be released, that none of the participants in the coup should be subjected to trial in any court, that none of the politicians removed from office should be allowed to return. Ironsi accepted all the demands on phone and gave him the needed assurances. At Nzeogwu's back, Ironsi was continually talking on phone to the earlier mentioned two friends of Nzeogwu. They kept mounting pressure on Nzeogwu to surrender. Eventually, Nzeogwu gave in and accepted the offer to surrender and move to Lagos. He invited Lieutenant Colonel Hassan Katsina for a handover. It was a public event covered by the press, local and foreign. At the ceremony, Nzeogwu inspected the guard of honor that was mounted in his honor and made a short speech, and after that he handed over the government of northern Nigeria to Hassan Katsina as the new military governor of the region. Hassan Katsina also made a short acceptance speech and thanked Nzeogwu for the handover. Nzeogwu then moved to the airport and checked into a waiting plane which was waiting to take him to Lagos. He was accompanied by his friend, the gentleman officer that came in from London by name Nwawu. Nzeogwu left the airport to Kaduna and flew to Lagos in the hope that all the promises made to him would be kept. He traveled in civilian clothing and had no guns with him. None of his boys went to Lagos with him. Nzeogwu did not know what was waiting for him in Lagos. As soon as he arrived at the Lagos International Airport, Nzeogwu saw to his chagrin that armored tanks had been mounted at the airport waiting for him and that the nozzles of the tanks were facing him directly. Aside from the armored tanks, there were dozens of machine guns mounted at strategic locations, all pointing directly at him. Nzeogwu was weak. He had taken himself to an environment that was manifestly unfriendly. It was too late for him to beat a retreat. As a soldier, he was aware of the consequences of any attempt by him to escape. He then accepted his fate, came down fully from the plane, and was arrested. He was first taken to the hospital for a comprehensive assessment, and from there, he was taken to Kirikiri Maximum Prison in Lagos, where he was locked up and remained there for days. He never came out of prison throughout Ironsi's regime and throughout Gowon's regime. At this time, many others that took part in the coup had been arrested and detained. With the arrest of Nzeogwu, the revolution which he planned with his fellows had effectively been brought to an end. Nzeogwu was to remain in prison pending the decision of the military government of Ironsi. Nzeogwu only came out of prison at the outbreak of the Nigeria-Biafran War. At this time, Nzeogwu had earlier been transferred to the prison in the east, where Ojukwu served as military governor. When Ojukwu declared Biafra as an independent state in 1967, Gowon declared war against Biafra in his mission to keep Nigeria one. Ojukwu fought back, and the consequence was a bitter war that lasted for 3 years with scores of lives lost on both sides. Ojukwu needed experienced hands to help him in the prosecution of the war. He thus ordered the release of prisoners like Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu. Nzeogwu joined him in the planning of the war and was given a command to lead. Not long after the war broke out, Nzeogwu was killed under circumstances that remain inexplicable till date. He was killed in Nsukka. Some accounts say he was killed by Nigerian troops in revenge for his role in the killing of the Premier of the North in the first military coup. Other accounts say that he was mistakenly killed at night during a reconnaissance that was led by Nzeogwu himself. Whatever may be the correct account, what is beyond disputation is the fact that Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu was killed in Nsukka in the then Republic of Biafra in the course of the Nigeria Civil War in 1967. Astonishingly, Nzeogwu's body was taken to Kaduna in northern Nigeria for burial. His bones are in Kaduna till today. This marked the end of the life and times of Major Patrick Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu. Since his participation in the military coup of January 1967, Nzeogwu's life was never the same again. His rise in the Nigerian army, which was quite remarkable and promising, took a nosedive from the day of the execution of the coup, and till his death, Nzeogwu did not bounce back in his career. His last rank was that of a major. Olusegun Obasanjo was Nzeogwu's best friend and confidant. They first met as young soldiers in Kaduna, and they became really close. When they were apart from each other, they exchanged letters, and when they were together, they shared many things in common. On several occasions, they spent nights together in the same flats. Obasanjo and Nzeogwu were really close. In 1987, Obasanjo published the book titled Nzeogwu in honor of his friend. The book was reprinted by Spectrum Books in association with Safari Books Export Limited in 1999. In the said book, Obasanjo recounts how he grew up with Nzeogwu as young officers of the Nigerian army and how religious and committed Nzeogwu was. He states in the book, in part, quote, "Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu and I were genuine and close friends who shared a similarity of outlook on many subjects. Our friendship was further cemented by our loneliness, a common adversary, and the danger we faced during military operations in the Congo Zaire, when law and order broke down in that unhappy country shortly after independence." End of quote. Obasanjo stated at page 103 of the book that up to the time of his departure from Nigeria to India for his staff college course in 1965, there was no mention of a plot to him by his close friend Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu that he was planning a coup. He noted further, quote, "Chukwuma and I exchanged a few letters while I was in India, but none of his letters gave me an indication of the heightened discontent and dissatisfaction that could lead to a coup." End of quote. Coincidentally, Obasanjo returned to Nigeria from India in the evening of 13th January 1966, and it was Nzeogwu that went to the Kano International Airport to carry him home, but throughout the journey from the airport to the house, Nzeogwu did not tell Obasanjo that in less than 48 hours, a bloody coup would be executed across the regions, with himself taking charge of the execution of the coup in the northern region. Obasanjo went to bed with the hope that he would meet his friend Nzeogwu in the morning, and while he was asleep, Nzeogwu and his men were on duty at the Sardauna's residence, where they forcefully broke into the residence. The Sardauna was shot, so also was his wife Hafsatu, his driver, and his personal secretary. Nzeogwu was in charge of the northern group, and aside from the above names already mentioned, Brigadier Demalogun and the wife were killed in their residence in Kaduna. Colonel Ralph Shodeinde, commandant of the Nigerian Defense Academy, was also killed in the Kaduna massacre. It was indeed a harvest of deaths in the north. At page 139 of the book titled Nzeogwu, Obasanjo has noted thus in quotes, "In our discussion before he left to Lagos, Chukwuma apologized to me and explained that the decision not to inform me about the coup was one of the most difficult decisions of his life. He considered that my return to the country some 36 hours before the coup was launched put him in a difficult position. That if he had told me about their plans and I indicated support, it was too late to cut a roll for me. That if on the other hand I failed to support, it was too late to stop him and their plan could be endangered by widening the circle of participants. He thus chose to treat the case as if I had not returned from abroad and to keep the coup plans secrets from me." End of quote. As noted earlier, Chukwuma was arrested on arrival in Lagos and detained at the Krikri Maximum Prison and later moved to other prison facilities. In the wake of the war in Biafra, Chukwuma was released from prison by the leader of the secessionist state of Biafra, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, and assigned to command a battalion. Not long after he was assigned, Chukwuma was killed in the dead of the night on the 29th of July 1967. His body was not found immediately until 31st of July 1967. His body was recovered and taken to Kaduna for burial at the military cemetery. Olusegun Obasanjo, Chukwuma's best friend, has described him thus, quote, "Chukwuma was a kind-hearted, open and generous person. He was both a Nigerian and a Pan-Africanist. He was good-natured but occasionally boisterous and impulsive. He was bold, courageous, and uninhibited both in speech and in action." End of quote. Some persons have stated that Chukwuma was a devout Catholic who was committed to his religious obligations, that he attended masses regularly, that he treated people with courtesy. How Chukwuma threw these fine attributes to the ground and became the mastermind and leader of Nigeria's most bloody military coup became a surprise to many that knew him closely. The result of the coup, particularly in the north where Chukwuma was the leader, was highly devastating in view of the number of persons killed in the north. Till this day, the name Major Patrick Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu rings a bell whenever the name is mentioned in any part of Nigeria. He is reputed as being the mastermind of the January 15, 1966 coup that took place in Nigeria. Chukwuma was born in 1937, and at the time of his execution of the coup in 1966, Chukwuma was only 29 years old. At 29, he was already a major, and his next rank would have been Lieutenant Colonel. At the time of his death in Biafra, he was 30 years old. The coup brought his promising career in the Nigerian army to a sudden end. He never took off again career-wise after the coup. I thank you all for watching this edition of Back in History, even as I invite you to subscribe to the channel or follow the page to get notification on every new video posted to the channel. I am your friend and host Ekeminudim, wishing you the best of time in all you do. I appreciate you for accompanying me always on this mission for the discovery, documentation, and preservation of the history of Nigeria and Africa. In our next episode on this series, we shall be discussing Major Emmanuel Ifajuna. Stay tuned and keep a date with us.